Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to dive into a more advanced scenario, and we are going to take a look at how we can establish a level where we will introduce one of the mechanics in an RTS game, real-time strategy. And that particular mechanics would be how to be able to find resources and be able to collect the resources. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so let's take a look at how we have put together this particular scene. And over here, just to give you a recap, we have the player's base, we have the player's storage facility, and over here we have some sort of resources that can be collected by the player and utilized later on down the road. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into runtime to see how this behaves before we dive in. So here we have the player. The player is going to go seek the resources. Once the player finds the resources, a signal is going to be sent to the storage facility. The storage facility is going to go ahead and instantiate a collector. The collector is going to start going back and forth between the resources and the storage facilities, collecting and storing, collecting and storing. And that's pretty much what it is. So let's take a look at how this whole thing was put together. I'm going to go ahead and exit the runtime. And we are going to take a look at the storage facility first. And our storage facility, if you've been following along the video series, is similar to what we created last time. The difference is that I did scale this up a little bit to meet the new dimensions of the whole level. And hence, since we have changed the scale of the actual model, we also had to recreate some of the animations. So let's take a look at the components again that are attached to this particular game object. So we have the box collider, which will be utilized to detect who is basically getting close to the storage facility. We have the animator controller, which is basically the state machine that's responsible to open or close the door. We'll see how we have put this together. And then, of course, we have the storage controller, which is the code base that is managing the whole behavior. So I'm going to wait until Visual Studios comes up. And this is the actual source code that will manage the behavior of the storage facility. So we'll take a look at all of those things. In fact, let's go ahead and dig into the C# code right now. So we have some public properties here again. Again, for the sake of demonstrations, I'm keeping everything public, so it's going to be easier. But in reality, you need to decide which attributes and properties are going to be visible, meaning public, and which ones are going to be protected or private. Right. So here we have an ID. We have a Boolean flag to indicate whether the door is open or closed. We're going to have a reference to the animator, so we can pass in the the parameters that will control the state. We're going to have a reference to the prefab of the collector, so that way we can instantiate it. We are going to have a reference to the spawn point of the collector, so where we want to spawn this, and whether the player is storing into the facility or not. Notice over here we have an on-enable and on-disable functions, and these are listening to a particular event that we are interested in. This event is defined and raised in resource collector, and basically this is the event, this is the message or the signal that I was referring to that will be passed to the storage facility once the resources has been found by the player. Okay, so we'll talk about how event handling is done. At the start function, we are referencing the animator, and then we have or on trigger enter. We have seen this before, but let's go ahead and dive into what is performing in this particular case. So it checks to see if a player or a collector has entered the space of the storage facility. For either one, is going to open the door. If it's the collector and the collector is coming back from the resources, what it's going to do is that it's going to start storing that resources as well into the storage facility. And the storing resources is basically a core routine, which is pretty simple. And basically all we are doing in here is we are simulating uh, kind of like a wait time, right? So we are saying wait for seconds, and we are passing the number of seconds we want to wait. We are setting the Boolean flag that we have, indicating whether we are storing or not to true. And once the timer is up, meaning that we have waited X amounts of time, then what we are doing is that we are telling the collector to start collecting again, right? So once you have stored the resources into the storage facility, go ahead and collect more of it. The resources found function that's basically handling that event is basically checking to see if the storage facility is the one that's associated with the collector. And if that's the case, what we are doing is that we are instantiating the collector using the prefab at the spawn point that we have indicated at design time. And then basically what we are doing is that we are telling the collector two important locations. One of them happens to be the location of the resource, which is passed through the event. And the second one is basically where the collector is going to come back to, right? The spawn point of the actual collector at the storage facility, right? So the resource transform is the location where the collector has to go and start collecting the resources. And the storage transform is the position that the collector has to return to start storing the resources back into the storage. These two lines over here have to do with the NavMesh agent. So we are using the NavMesh AI for pathfinding. So basically what we are doing is that once we instantiate a new object, we also have to tell the NavMesh agent where basically you need to be positioned in the NavMesh to be able to go around and be able to navigate around the level. So basically this few lines of code, that's basically what's happening. You are getting the NavMesh agent. You are disabling it first. Then we are utilizing the NavMesh heat. It's similar to the raycast heat, but it's going to be working with the NavMesh. And then we are basically sampling a particular position that we want to inject the agent on the NavMesh that's been generated based on the transform position of it. And then once we have a hit, if there is a hit, then what we are doing is that we are wrapping the agent around that particular mesh, and then we are going to enable it. Once we enable it, then we tell the collector to go ahead and perform your duties, which is start collecting, right? So once you get instantiated, once you get placed into the nav mesh, then now you're ready to be able to go and find your way to that particular resource transform. So that's basically what this code is doing over here. If we go back to the editor and let's jump over to the resource object. So let's go ahead and jump here. So at the resource root, we also have a sphere collider, which will be basically responsible as far as who has entered our particular space. And we have the resource collector C# code. And in the resource collector, we define a delegate. This is a custom event that we are going to be uh, creating and um, invoking, and then consuming it at the storage controller, right? And then basically this function is uh, responsible for executing whenever that particular event has been raised inside the resource controller. And of course, we have a couple of other properties here, whether the resource was found, the collection point of the resource, like the actual position or the transform where the collector has to go to be able to start collecting the resources. We identify the resource with some sort of an ID, and then we indicate whether this is a player resource or a non-player resource. And we get into what that means later on in the next few videos when we start building the logic for the NPC, right? For the non-player character, basically the AI. So here we have whether this particular uh, resource is being collected or not. Again, on the trigger enter event, we check to see if you're the player or if you're the collector. If you have been the player and the resources is the first time that is being found, then we set this to true, and then we are invoking this event on resource found. We are invoking it, and then we are passing the transform of the collection point, right? Where the collector has to go to be able to collect the resources. And then, of course, we are passing in the resource ID to be able to associate it with the storage and also with the collector. If you happen to be the collector and you're entering the resource area, then we check to see if you are collecting or not. If you're not collecting, then we trigger a coroutine that's going to start collecting the resources based on some duration. It's kind of similar to the storage, how you store the resources back into a storage facility. Over here, we are doing the same, but instead of storing it, we are collecting it. So the logic is pretty much the same. So if you come down to the collecting resources, we have some sort of a time that we pass to it. We tell it that, yes, we are collecting, wait for X amount of time. Once this time period has passed, then we tell the collector to now go ahead and start storing it. So we are telling the collector, now is the time to go back to the storage and do what you need to do. Okay, so that is the preliminary logic of this resource collector. And then, of course, on the collector controller, let's take a look and see how this looks. It's pretty straightforward. So as far as the collector controller knows, it just has a reference to the NavMesh agent. And then basically, it only executes if I'm collecting or if I'm storing. So if you're collecting, we just passing the transform as far as where you're supposed to go. And if you're storing, you're still passing or calling the go-to location and passing the transform of wherever you're supposed to go. And both of them are basically setting the destination of the agent, which is responsible for finding the path to whatever position that this particular agent, which is associated with a game object, which happens to be a vehicle or a placeholder for a vehicle or a character, is going to be going over to that particular location. So this is pretty much the gist of it. So very simple logic, very easy to follow. Let me go ahead and go back to the IDE. And now let's run it one more time so you get an understanding of how everything's working together now that you have seen the code behind. So here, the player just has a basic character controller. We entered the resources collider. So we triggered and sent a signal to the storage facility. The storage facility basically instantiated this collector object, and the collector knows where the resources are because we passed that information when we invoke that function. And the collector basically was instantiated and it was told, okay, you're ready to go. You know where the resources are and you know where the storage is. Keep on going back and forth between them. And let's go ahead and collect some resources so we can start building our base. All right, so that's all I have for you guys for this particular video. Hopefully, this was something that was useful to you guys. Again, I keep the examples super simple to make sure that you guys understand the concepts. The most important thing is the actual concept. All right. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share. And see you guys in the next video. Have a good one. Bye.